Let's talk about authenticity. This is one of my absolute favorite concepts. I know I say that a lot, but I mean it. Authenticity is going to be the result of a lot of different theories and researchers that we'll talk about. But it really all goes back to, for me, Carl Rogers, who was a humanistic psychologist who had so much to say on becoming a person, actually the name of one of his most well-renowned books. And then it's been picked up today in research by researchers like Wood. So authenticity is a very on-topic and trend concept, and I think there's a lot of power to it, and especially today's generation has really learned how to identify and embrace authenticity. But not all of us have, so it's really important to talk about it and to make sure we know what it is and how to support it. So first, we have to know what it is. So I'll tell you the three components of trait authenticity. This is when you're being yourself most of the time. There's something else called state authenticity, and that's your authenticity in any given situation. But we're talking about the overall personality trait of trait authenticity. So the first component is self-alienation. Now this is how connected you feel between your thoughts of yourself and your feelings about who you should be. I'm going to use the example of my coming to terms with being gay because for myself and a lot of people, authenticity has been the thing we've struggled with the most. How do we come to terms with who we are and live a life that reflects that? So for this first component of authenticity, self-alienation, a lot of times people will say, when did you know you were gay? Or when did you decide to come out? I can't identify a moment because it was so slow, it was so gradual, so continuous. I knew I was attracted to guys almost from the onset of puberty, and I had repressed it as some kind of problem I had, just something weird that I did sometimes in my spare time, be attracted to guys. But it was so tough for me to accept that. In college, I would try to date girls, it wouldn't work out. I realized I had very strong feelings towards my best friend. So it was a super slow process of coming to terms with the fact that I was gay. When I realized it, I still had a lot of negative emotions about it. So it's not like I went, ugh, I'm gay. I went back and forth about it, like maybe I'm not really gay, maybe I shouldn't be gay, how can I not be gay? So it was this really continual process. For some folks, perhaps it could be instantaneous, but I just want to stress that this idea of self-alienation, it's not you know yourself or you don't. It's a very fluid, continuous process, and you can be anywhere along that continuum. Maybe you feel really in touch with who you are. Maybe you feel completely out of touch with who you really are. This is a part of life that especially people in their teenagers, in their teen years and early 20s, regardless of sexuality, will often ponder, who am I? And it's a question some of us will ask ourselves throughout our lives as well. So again, it's not necessarily always reflective of a problem in your life. It's something that we can ponder and consider as this philosophical question. So the first component of authenticity is self-alienation. The second is authentic living. So once you figure out who you are you projecting that to other people? Are you living in a way that you feel good about? So again, even when I realized I was gay and kind of came to terms with it somewhere around the age of 20, it took me several years to actually come out. I convinced myself I was gay, but I was never going to tell anybody. And I didn't really come out until I was 24. So that's, again, several years of trying to come up with this courage and trying to find a way to be who I was externally. Even when I told people I was gay and I started dating guys, it still was something that was difficult. It's still difficult for me today, and that's a long time ago. But it was so powerful, the messages I received that being gay is not okay. You shouldn't do this, and you shouldn't be this way, and you shouldn't act that way. And a lot of us get that message about a lot of different things, whether it's our hobbies, our interests, our personal characteristics. And when society can really pound those upon you, it can be tough to just live a life of who you are and express yourself. You know, people who are transgender feel a very powerful way inside, and society at times can be extremely hesitant to allow them or to support them in just living and expressing who they feel like they really are. So it can be very tough, even if you know who you are, to live that life. It's a very brave thing to do, just to be yourself. It's sad that it is. It should be easy. But for many people, it's not. So that second component, authentic living, is something that we really try to help people struggling with authenticity to do. And then the third component of authenticity is accepting external influence. You might think, well, really authentic people just say, to heck with the world, no one matters to me, I don't care what anybody thinks. That's not really true. We care what people think to some degree. Obviously, some people care more than others. I used to be so preoccupied with what people thought about me. Now, I still care. I care what my students think about me. I care what my parents think about me. But not to the point where it's going to change the way I live my life, because I feel finally comfortable with myself and confident with myself. I accept the external influence. I accept that my mother may not like this about me, or that my best friend may disagree with this. So I can accept the influence without necessarily saying it's going to change who I am. Maybe it does sometimes, but it doesn't have to, and that's the key difference. Research actually shows that people who accept that external influence actually feel more authentic because they're just more in touch with the real world and what's happening. So I finally am at a place where I feel like I'm living my authentic life. I'm talking about music and psychology constantly in every format I possibly can. So I am luckily and very blessed to be experiencing the benefits of authenticity I want to share with you. The first is just this overall sense of well-being. My mom cracks me up sometimes because I'll call and she'll just remark on how happy I sound. And for her, that's not something that she's used to hearing. For so long I had depression, and even on my best days I was just kind of okay. So she really enjoys and notices when I'm just like, hey, what's up, Mom? Life's great. Don't get me wrong, life's not always a party or as cheesy as I just made it sound. I have bad days, I get ticked, I get sad. But generally speaking, I feel good about my life and my place in it. And that can be a direct result of authenticity, knowing who you are and living that way. The second is self-esteem. We talked about self-esteem in another class. And again, if you're living the true you life, then you can feel good about that. Again, we talked about this with self-esteem. If you have a high self-concept, let's say you're a very productive doctor, you're very financially well off, you have a huge family. But if none of that fits into who you feel like you should be, none of it matters. So authenticity and self-esteem are really strongly connected. If you're being yourself and you're allowed to be yourself, you can feel good about yourself. And then finally, you're at a lower risk of depression if you have that authenticity. Again, a lot of people have very difficult lives where they're constantly bullied or put down because of who they are and how they're choosing to live. But many of those people you talk to are very inspiring because they have this confidence that even in spite of all this negativity, they are making the choice to be who they want to be. And that's something that I want to leave this topic with, is that authenticity is a choice. It's the decision to think about yourself, to reflect on who you really are. It's the decision to live that life and to put yourself out there and to be brave. And it's a decision to understand that the world will influence you and you don't have to cave into that. It can be very difficult. You do have to accept that. Being authentic means some people won't like you. For the longest time, I was a people pleaser to kind of combat my low self-esteem and depression, and I thought, if I can bend over backwards to make everybody like me, then I'll feel good about myself. But you know what? I never did, because I wasn't who I was pretending to be to people. I was one person to my parents, I was one person to people in my church, I was one person to my friends at college, and none of them were really the real me. So again, it's one of those things where if you want to be authentic and honest and happy, you got to kind of accept that outside influence, that some people aren't going to like you. That's not always easy for me to accept, but when I'm being myself and someone responds negatively, I try to view that as, wow, that person doesn't like the real me. That means I'm showing the real me, and that's not something I've always been able to do. So I can take that negative reaction and turn it into a way to feel good about myself. Hopefully, you've all been allowed to live authentic, honest lives. If not, perhaps some of these tips can help you in the way that they have helped me.